Hey everyone, welcome into an at-home edition of Falcons Today by Chat Sports. Matthew Peterson here, running through some rumors regarding the Falcons and NFL free agency because two moves were made today that I think are great news for Atlanta, and that is Jonathan Allen was released along with Harold Landry. So the reason why I believe this is a little bit of extra good news for the Falcons compared to other teams is Atlanta was never in a good spot to give up draft capital to acquire these players who were on the trade block. The Falcons only have 5 picks in the upcoming draft, 2 of which are in the 7th round. They were going to part ways with their 1st round pick. 2nd would be tough to pry away. And then you left with a 4th, which may or may not have been enough for like Trey Hendrickson, for example, who we'll talk about later on in the video. But for a team that didn't have a lot of draft capital, they were banking on some of these more marquee pass rushers getting released, and that way it's a level playing field, and it does not come down to who's got the most picks to give up for some of these players. And so that's why I think this is a really good dose of news for the Falcons, because now they can actually get involved in some contract talks with these players without having to give up draft capital for them. So I'll ask you right now, between the 3 pass rushers who have come up in availability over the last 24 hours, Trey Hendrickson from the Bengals, Jonathan Allen, formerly with the Commanders, and Harold Landry, formerly with the Titans, which player would you want to pursue the most, knowing that Hendrickson's going to cost you something in a trade and then a big fat contract extension, and Allen and Landry are not going to cost you anything in a trade, but they are not the NFL reigning sack leader. So pros and cons across the board here. If I had to rank my preference for the 3, knowing the cost it would take to get them, I would go with Harold Landry, Trey Hendrickson, Jonathan Allen. I would love to see a world where Hendrickson's in Atlanta. I do fear that the Falcons parting ways with the 2nd round pick when they only have 5 picks to begin with might be too steep for Terry Fontenot. You got to think about the GM in Atlanta whose background is scouting. And so whenever you get different come-ups for GMs, it's important to look at their history a little bit, because when you have a scouting-based background, well, that's a scout who is a draft fiend. That's his bread and butter right there. That's what got him to where he is right now. And if he doesn't have draft picks, he can't lean on, in his opinion, his biggest strength of a GM. Now, I'm not advocating for Terry Fontenot as some draft wizard, but someone who was a longtime scout in New Orleans and then director of scouting. In his eyes, in his mind, he probably thinks he is a draft wizard. So I don't see him giving up a really valuable draft pick when they're already one of the most shorthanded teams in the league when it comes to draft picks this year. So I won't say for that reason I'm out, but I'm skeptical. Now, I have seen reports from The Athletic, I think even ESPN, that the Falcons and the Commanders could be very, very interested in Hendrickson. He's 30 years old, 17.5 sacks the past 2 seasons. It's hard to find something not to like about Hendrickson. I think the biggest knock on him is just his name isn't Myles Garrett or TJ Watt or Micah Parsons, right? He's just not quite in that maybe upper elite tier, but he's not very far behind if he's not in that tier. 17.5 sacks the past 2 seasons. I don't think anyone has more sacks the past 2 seasons than that. So this is a player who can get after the quarterback without an issue, and for a team that desperately needs help with that, this should not be rocket science. But knowing the cost it would take to get him, the extension I'm not too worried about, although I will say Max Crosby signing a $35.5 million average annual salary extension means Hendrickson is now looking to start at $36 million. He's going to want to be the new highest paid defensive player. I'm not saying like he deserves or not deserves, but that's just what's going to end up happening here. Is whatever team trades for Trey, he's going to want $36 million. And if it's not $36 million, it's $35. It's not far off of it. And I don't mind that contract for him. I mean, sure, 30 years old, you don't want to pay someone when they come to your team for all the accomplishments they had on their team if you don't think that success is going to continue. But for Atlanta, there has to be some level of desperation if you're Fontenot. Since he's taken over in 2021, the Falcons are dead last in sacks by a country mile. So there probably isn't a dollar amount that's too high for a guy with 17.5 sacks the last 2 seasons. Okay, before we talk more about Jonathan Allen and Harold Landry, because I really want to dive into that, quick reminder to go ahead and check out our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks, by the way, calls the Peach State home, so if you're looking to have some extra fun and interest while watching some of the March Madness games and all the big games coming up, visit Prize Picks, because all you've got to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you can win up to 1,000 times your money. My favorite thing personally about Prize Picks, though, is you do not have to go 3 for 3 or 4 for 4 to win. No, you can go 2 for 3 or 3 for 4, and you can still win. So it doesn't seem like it seems like there's always a lot of fun options going on over at Prize Picks. So I really recommend, if you're looking to have some extra fun while watching March Madness and all those other games and, basketball season heating up and whatnot, download the Prize Picks app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. All of that information is in the comments and description of today's video. Prize Picks, run your game. Now let's talk a little bit about Harold Landry and Jonathan Allen. I want to start with Landry, and we're looking over his stats right now together. Missed all of 2022 with a preseason ACL tear, but man, since then, doesn't look like he's slowing down much. 10.5 sacks, 9 sacks. Sure, his best season was 2021 when he was a 12-sack player, but maybe the Titans are, the Titans are looking to retool a little bit. Let's just call it what it is. They're looking to rebuild, right? They got a new GM, second-year head coach, and moving on from an expensive 29-year-old defensive end, outside linebacker is not the most, crazy thing in the world to do. I'm a little surprised they could not find a trade for him. There is a possibility that the offers they got were not teams that Landry wanted to play for, and they weren't very good offers. So sometimes you see teams do right by players and go, we could get a 6 for you, but if you don't want to go there, we're not going to burn a bridge with you, but more importantly with your agent, and have you be upset and have a good relationship between us over 6-7 years go down the drain, all for a 6th-round draft pick. So that's a possibility to factor in here, but I must admit, I thought Landry, if he was going to get traded, would find a partner. It wouldn't end in a release. However, it's happened with other players before. DeAndre Hopkins, he ended up getting released. I think Cooper Kupp is going to end up getting released, and they're still good players, but you also got to keep in mind, whenever you're trading for a player, you're not just acquiring the player. You're acquiring 2 things: the player and his contract. And sometimes the contract can outweigh the positives of a player. So Landry, to me, still a high caliber player. 9 sacks this past season. Even if he is starting to decline a little bit on the right contract for how bad this pass rush was this past season, I'm in. As for Jonathan Allen, this one I'm a little bit more on the fence about, because sure, 2-time Pro Bowler, he's been very versatile. He's been all over the defensive line, defensive end. As of late, he's played more of a defensive tackle role. The pass rush production has started to dip. 9 sacks, 7.5 sacks, 5 sacks, and now 3 sacks. So no one should be expecting Allen to come out and be that 9-sack player again. And I don't think the Falcons are really interested in acquiring older interior defensive linemen. They've already got 2 of those guys, in Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata. So why would you move on from them to make room for an almost equally as old interior defensive lineman? Plus, you just drafted a bunch of young interior defensive linemen. So while Allen does have a great resume and he's a very accomplished player, and I still think he's a good football player, I don't think the timing with the Falcons is right. If they didn't have Grady Jarrett and or David Onyemata, then okay, I can talk myself into it, but they're going to likely either move on from one of those guys or ask them to take a pay cut just to get below the salary cap. So why would you move on from one just to sign Jonathan Allen to probably a near-ish dollar amount? I don't see how that improves the locker room and the roster and how that helps the books when it comes to the salary cap. So Allen's kind of towards the bottom of my wish list between all these three players. All right, that's going to do it from us from our at-home edition of Falcons Today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed it, hit that like button, scroll down, subscribe, and also drop an ATL in the comment section if you're still watching.